Well, great. Well, I'm glad everybody could join us in person and online. Nice to meet y'all and good to see you here in person. So we have a good presentation built out for today. We like to do this webinar every year. This is our disaster preparedness webinar. And the idea here is for you guys to take a couple minutes and think about this year's hurricane season and how it might affect your business and what you might want to do to be better and best prepared this year for hurricane season. It happens every year. It shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that we have to deal with this. So I want to take a couple minutes, help you guys just remember what's happened in the past and help us make a plan for the future. You know, this is something that our company, that Straight Edge, does every year to get ready for hurricane season. So we want to help our clients and other people in the community get ready for hurricane season as well. So 2021, we used to call this the disaster lunch. And I always thought that was funny, right? Like, we don't want the lunch to be a disaster, but we want to talk about disasters. So hopefully the lunch goes well today. So a couple things about this year's hurricane season that we have right now. So NOAA has already released like the forecast for the year, trying to give us an idea of what hurricane season is going to be like. A couple things to note. 2020 2020 tried hard to be ridiculous for a lot of reasons. And in addition to COVID and all of the things that happened in 2020, our hurricane season was over the top, off the charts bad. So last year we had 30 storms in the Gulf or in the Atlantic hurricane season. We had 14 named hurricanes and 7 of them were over Category 3. So that's over the top bad compared to other years. You see here in the graphic, the averages are about 14 named storms, 7 become a hurricane, and only 3 of them get over Category 3. So last year, we almost had double in all of those categories. So when we look at 2021 and we see that our number of storms is going to be above average and twice the average are 2 really different things. And so right now, NOAA is telling us that it will be above average, but still below 2020's numbers. So what that means is we should expect at least a storm or 2 that makes its way to us and maybe hits the Texas Gulf Coast, Houston, Corpus, those areas. So we need to be prepared for that because we know we're going to have something happen this year. They're not telling us it's going to be a low impact year. It'll be a slightly higher impact year. This graphic comes from my buddy, Alan Holt. Those of y'all that know me and listen to me talk in our office I like Alan Holt. I think he's pretty funny. I'm happy that he's our weatherman. But this is a graphic that KIII put out to let us know kind of when to expect the storms. So they get worse throughout the season and they kind of peak right around the middle. So around September is when we're going to expect to have any of the most likelihood based on past years for when we might have a storm. But hurricane season started already. We're 9 days into it, right? So a storm could happen at any moment. There's something they're looking at down in the like Yucatan right now. But we know that it picks up as the months go on. So July, August, and then peaking in September. So everybody just be ready that those are the most likely times that we might run across a storm in 2021. These are the names. I've never seen a Hurricane Doug yet. I keep waiting. I'm hoping that there's going to be a Doug, but there hasn't been. So if your name's on this list, congratulations. One thing that I had forgotten about last year's hurricane season was we went through the alphabet and ended up in the Greek letters. And I don't remember that had happened in the past, but that is what happens. When we get past Teresa, Victor, and Wanda, we'll end up in the Greek letters for this next year. But if your name's on this list, congratulations. You might be able to be a named storm this year. So, but anyway, I'm still waiting, or I'm waiting for a Hurricane Hank. I think that has a good ring to it, don't you, Hank? Yeah, Hurricane Hank. Yeah, Henry. What do you bet that's Henri? Do you think that? I bet that. Anyway. So here's some things that you can do to get ready for hurricane season. We have 5 steps that we're going to talk through today. The first thing that you need to do is think about the actual business critical functions that you're going to want to do during a disaster or a storm. There's some things that probably don't matter. If there was a hurricane in the Gulf right now, we wouldn't be doing a webinar. So I don't need to plan to be able to do a webinar during a hurricane, but I do need to plan on running payroll. If it were to happen on the wrong week of the month, I'm gonna have to run payroll potentially during a storm or a hurricane, or where I don't have the same kind of access that I'm used to inside my business. So that's what I want you to be thinking about. What are the business critical functions that have to happen during a hurricane? Some things that come to mind, I mentioned payroll. Another thing is around your phones and what happens with your phones and who answers the phones during a hurricane. Another thing you might think of is how you communicate your hours and your operations during a storm or a hurricane. You know, I know we called this the disaster lunch. I don't want you to only think about hurricanes, because there's other kinds of disasters that we have to prepare for. We have some slides about other disasters, because you don't want to only limit it to hurricanes. Hurricanes are a little unique. We have a little better chance of planning. There are some things that happen very spontaneously. We want to be ready for those too. But it's a good opportunity for you to sit down with your team, sit down with your leadership folks, and just say, what's the most critical business interruption type of things that we have to be able to do during a major disaster or a major problem. So you're gonna take these items, you're gonna classify them from least severe to most severe. And then we actually have a worksheet that we'll email out to everybody. It's a good Excel document that you can use with your team. Just throw it up on a computer and start typing some things in and get your stuff organized. That's kind of a picture of this. We call this business critical process worksheet. So over on the left, you have some of the ideas that your team's going to throw out. Okay, what if we have to schedule patients? Or what do we do about patients that are scheduled? How are we going to create sales proposals? How do we open up a new investment account? Like, the idea here is that some of these things are so low priority, you would never want to bother with them during a hurricane or a disaster, but there's some things on here that you absolutely need to be able to do. We have a client that actually does like cleanup, environmental like cleanup after disasters. They need to be able to get proposals out the door during a disaster, because that's kind of their bread and butter. Like, that's a time where they're going to have a big bump in their workload is during a storm. But you know, even in the case of Straight Edge, I don't know that people are going to be buying laptops and desktops the week of a hurricane. So we'd probably need to be a little less worried about getting proposals out for laptops and desktops. But if you're in a business where you have to serve the community during a storm for some reason or another, think about how you would do that and serve your customers during a storm, especially if that's a big part of your business. But yeah, scheduling, payroll, deposits. You know, some of you guys, companies probably run through cash quickly. And if you're not always making deposits, then you can't always pay your bills the right way. So how are you going to do that during a maybe potential week of a storm? Can you receive money and get your bills paid all at the same time in that given week, depending on how you guys run through cash and how your business might be cyclical or run through cash? Dispatch, like for telephone systems, also, like, what do you want the phones to do when there's a storm, and how do we do that? And how do we make sure we know ahead of time what we want to do? Something you're going to hear as a theme throughout this is our ability to plan up front goes a long way to have us be better prepared. Some of it might seem silly, but it's way better to make these decisions now than when the storm is in the Gulf or when it's already, you know, making landfall and you're trying to scramble. We don't want to scramble. We want to have a good plan. One of the reasons that we like to do this webinar every year is your IT folks want to know what your plan is. So, spoiler alert, when you guys meet with people on my team, this is one of the things we want to talk about. What's your plan for a disaster? How can we make sure that we can meet the need that you have during a disaster? Trying to make a bunch of phone calls the week of a hurricane isn't what any of us want to do. So, business critical worksheet. We'll send this sheet out just so you can have it as a template and work with it from there. So something that I always try to do when we go through this presentation is think about the last year that we had and some of the disasters. Well, I told you earlier, you can't just focus on hurricanes, because we all went through, I don't know, I called it a reverse hurricane. It was a whole lot of ice and stuff, but it was the same things that we prepare for during a hurricane is what happened during the winter storm. We couldn't get food, people didn't have power, the roads were not passable. The only difference was a lot of us were at our homes and didn't really have the chance to evacuate. I don't know if any of y'all felt the same way that I did during the winter storm, but I was preparing for like some cold weather. Like, that was the level I was ready for, was I probably need to get my jacket out of the closet. And it turned into multiple days of no power and roads that weren't, easily passable and running out of supplies. So, and I don't know how they named it, but I've heard this, they called it Winter Storm Uri. Don't know where that came from, but somebody gave it a name. So when you go look at it, the 2021 February storm, they called it Uri. So what work can you do when you don't have access to your primary building? This is one of the things that we dealt with during this storm. Our staff couldn't actually get here because the roads were so bad with ice, and we told folks just to stay at home. But it changed what we could and couldn't do during those days. How do you function, during those days? Now, good news from 2020, a lot of us have a lot of practice in how we work from home, and we've figured out some ways that you're able to still get work done even when you're at your home. We had good practice. We started to talk about this like it's work from anywhere. It's not just work from home, it's work from anywhere. So if you were at home, if you were on vacation, if you were wherever, you should still be able to get some of the work done that you might need to get done and have access to the systems that you need access to. So what operations or what departments can still function when you're not inside your building? What projects and what work can you do even when you can't get to your physical locations? All of us are in businesses that have to make money and turn a profit. And one of the ways that we can do that is look at what can we do and what can we not do. Like the things we're not able to complete, but the things that we are able to complete. In our business, there's some things that we can do remotely, even if we were all working from our homes again. And so when we think about a disaster, we want to be able to do the things that we can do from our homes, and be prepared for that. The idea here is that you want to quickly decide where you're going to be trying to get the work done from. That's what's most helpful to your IT folks is where are you? We're going to send people home. We're going to send people to our branch office. We're going to set up a temporary location, those kinds of things. The where of how you're going to get the work done is probably one of the most important things. And like I said, we're much better prepared to work from home than we used to be. But it doesn't have to be a hurricane. It can also be an unplanned like winter storm. So take this as a good reminder to step 2 here is that you're going to go create some emergency contact forms. Once again, we have a little form that we have a template we can send for this. But use this as a reminder. I don't know, you guys ever heard the thing about daylight savings time, and that's when you're supposed to go change the batteries in your smoke detector? Like, have y'all ever heard that? Like when the daylight savings time changes, go check the batteries in your smoke detector. I treat this the same way. It's hurricane season, go update your emergency contact forms. Go make sure that you have everybody's up-to-date contact information. Cell phones, personal emails, addresses, whatever it is that you want to collect for people, go through and sweep, make sure you have their contact and maybe even an emergency contact for that person. And then for your company, go through and identify those vendors that you need to have access to during the storm. Those of y'all that work with us, you probably know our phone number by now, so you probably don't need to write down our phone number, but some of you might. So write down your IT people's phone number. But second, I don't know my insurance carrier's phone number by heart. I don't have my policy numbers memorized. I want to try to get all that in one place so that if I do have to make some insurance claim or if I do have to communicate with some of my vendors during a disaster or a storm, I want it really readily available, quick to get to so that I'm not scrambling to try to find information. So take this as a great reminder and opportunity to go collect all your emergency contacts. As by another just point of reference, they tell us, and we found it to be true, that you're more likely to be able to get a text message out the door during a disaster than a phone call. Sometimes the cell phone network can't handle as many phone calls if there's a lot, but it can normally get text messaging out. So make sure you have that information on file for people too. So a couple examples of some emergency contact forms. Your people. It's nice to just ask the question, if not so that you can write it down, but just so that you can help your own people plan. What is your evacuation plan? Like, what are you going to do? So you and your team members ask the question, if a storm comes, what are you going to do? At our company, there's some examples of, I have an elderly parent that still lives here in Corpus. I'm going to stay unless it's a storm of this magnitude. And then we're going to all leave together. Or, hey, I'm bugging out as soon as it's a Category 1 storm. I don't want anything to do with this, and I can just leave. So talk to your people and help them think about it. One thing that we've noticed is that there are more and more people that work in our company that aren't from the area. They're new to Corpus. And so when you look at people that have never dealt with a hurricane before, they might not know. Let this be your opportunity to help explain to them how it works and what to be afraid of and what not to, and how to kind of plan and prep. We have a couple people that have moved here from other places that didn't know what to do. And so it was a good opportunity for us to say, hey, let me give you some pointers on what to do so you're not kind of trying to figure it out on your own. So be kind to those that have moved here and explain to them what to do. But it also helps you plan. Hey, I know that half my team is leaving town. That helps me know what's going to happen whenever we want to come back to work. So have those conversations with your team members so that you can know. Like I said, grab property information, any kind of vendor information, get it all in one place just to make it easy. Once again, check your smoke alarms. Like, this is the time. This is a great time of year to do some of these things that otherwise might fall by the wayside. So I always like to go back. 2017 seems like a long time ago now, but I'm sure most of you in here remember Hurricane Harvey. There were some kind of special things about Hurricane Harvey that changed the way that we even do our planning. One is we don't evacuate to Houston anymore. We told we were like, hey, if you're going to leave Corpus, like, go somewhere that's not going to get the storm. Like Houston and Corpus, like, not where you want to be. Like, let's all go somewhere else. So if you have anybody that says, I leave for Houston, I'm going to go to Houston to ride out a storm, maybe tell them to think about that a little different. Anyway, so where you go for your evacuation plan is something that Harvey taught us. The same storm that hits Corpus, there's a good chance that it will hit Houston and at least give it some rain, even if it doesn't get the wind. So just keep that in mind. That's kind of how the pattern that the storms have normally. The other thing about Harvey that was a little special was, we had a plan where at that 72-hour mark, we knew what like our steps were going to be based on the severity of the storm. But what I remember about Harvey is it went from like probably a category 1 to making landfall as a category 4 very quickly. The change in its intensity was pretty quick. Like you can see, it was basically a day. It went from a 1 to a 4. From Thursday to Friday, it went from a 1 to a 4. And in my mind, when I was preparing my family and our company for that storm, I was thinking it's a category 1. We do these things if it's a category 1, and it became a category 4 quickly. So these storms can change and happen very quick. So everybody keep that in mind too. What it made me want to do was shorten some of our decision-making timelines from what they used to be. So we don't really have 72 hours to plan anymore. We have less time. We got to do different things faster in the same amount of time. So have that be a reminder that the storms can happen. They can change their intensity quickly, and we want to be ready. So make your decisions quickly. You can't wait that much on what you're going to do. Some other notes too. I had kind of forgotten about this storm. I don't know if when everybody was working from home last year, we did have Hurricane Hanna that came through. Something special about Hanna was, look where it started. It kind of started kind of right in the middle of the Gulf, right? It didn't come from the south, and we didn't have a lot of time. Same thing. We didn't have a lot of time to plan. It went from a low pressure system to a category 1 storm in 3 days. Once again, we weren't thinking it's going to be a category 1 storm. We were thinking it's going to be a lot of rain. So same thing. Our decision making has to get quicker. These storms seem to be getting faster as time goes along. So let's be prepared for a storm to change its intensity and us be ready. So Harvey and Hanna kind of have the same story. Like they kind of happened quickly and got more severe fast and didn't give us a lot of time to plan. The other thing about Hanna that I remember is it Thursday to Saturday. It's not like the storms don't care what our normal work week looks like. It's not like, I'm going to have a storm on a Monday and we'll be ready by Friday. This was like storm on a Thursday. We got to be ready by the weekend. So keep that in mind too, and how just the time of the week might affect your business. A lot of companies run payroll on Friday. So you would have been dealing with a storm and a payroll all at the same time. How do you deal with that? Those are the questions you need to ask yourself and come up with some answers. Some of the things that we know after storms blow through is that obviously the preference is for power to come back to residential areas first. That's something we've noticed. So your business may not have power, but your people might have power at their homes. They want to get the people's, the residents back up and going first. So that's something that we've noticed. There are always sort of pockets of Corpus or other towns where they get power or never lose power. I'm not a AEP engineer to know why that's the case, but there's going to be some people that are going to have power the whole time and not really be impacted. And then other people, it's going to take days and days just based on kind of where you are and what has to get fixed. Obviously, where there's the most direct hit, it's dramatically worse than the ones that are on the fringes of the storm. We all know like Port Aransas was affected at a whole nother level, even different than Corpus, and it's not that far away. But the closest to where that eye and the brunt of the storm is where you're going to have the most impact and the most places that we need to be concerned about and how we get back up and going. Like I said, don't evacuate to Houston. That might not be surprising to those of y'all that are used to hurricanes, but if you're new, don't go to Houston. Figure out your work from home strategy. Where do we do, how do we run payroll? How do we access our line of business applications? What do we do with our phone system? Like I said, we also have seen people leverage all of their social media as a way to communicate with their customers too. You know, hey, our facility at so-and-so location is offline, but this other facility is open. Please visit us at that location. Or we're not staffing our Spawn South location, but our main office still has people. You know, like those kinds of communications through your social media is great. So once again, before the storm, who has access to the social media accounts? Who can go make those posts? What kinds of posts do you want them to make? Ask those questions, give those answers now before the storm kind of comes through. So this is a slide about planning. So Patton is known for saying a good plan, even though violently executed now, is better than a perfect plan executed next week. So just do the best that you can. Those of y'all that might be perfectionists want to have every little nitpicky thing figured out about your plan. But I promise that you just going through the process with your team of talking about a storm ahead of time is going to give a lot of stability to your business when you come and deal with the next time that we have a hurricane or a disaster. So at least go start making your plan. Think of it as a rough draft, or it's always in draft, and it's our best idea of what might happen. There's nothing wrong with starting with something and then making some changes. So when we think about our planning, here's kind of some things that we do that should help you guys think about how you might do some of your planning. You just write out what the issue is. Power outage. So for what it's worth, we plan for power outages for our clients even on sunny days in May, because sometimes a car hits a telephone pole and you lose power at a location. So we have our clients and us, we plan for these kinds of ideas. So in the case of like a power outage, we think, what are we going to do if the power's out for an hour? Maintain the schedule. We're going to work with the lights off for a while. Everything's going to be fine. Don't do anything different, as an example. If you're looking at like a 4-hour power outage, we're going to cancel some appointments for the morning, but we're going to shift those to the afternoon. We want to have the IT people on standby, ready to restore power. I can say that in our experience and some of our team, when AEP gives an estimate, they're pretty accurate. In our experience, it's not like they're telling you it's going to be up by noon and then it's 3 days from now. If they say noon, it's going to be pretty close to noon, maybe before, but close to that timeline. So just in our experience of watching power outages and when power gets restored, those return times are usually pretty accurate. So you can plan by them, is my point. We don't have to just assume that it says noon and they mean tomorrow. If they say noon, pretty good chance that they have a good idea of getting things back up by noon. So you can take those to plan by. Same, if you're going to have no power for a whole day, it's a whole different plan. So when you think about the different issue you might run against, power outage, the next slide here we have about some other scenarios, but figure out the scenario, figure out how you roll back and change your plan based on the amount of time you're going to be without power or without internet or whatever the situation might be. This is AEP's outage map. If you're not familiar with this, go look at AEP's website. They have a great and very up-to-date outage map that they keep track of people that have reported issues and when they expect to get them back up and going and the number of customers that are affected. This has been invaluable to us when we have clients that have power outages or when we have things that we're tracking. Here you go, same kind of planning scenarios in the case of a hurricane. What do I do at each one of the landfall estimate type timelines? Like I said, you kind of decide what you're going to do and you work your way backwards. So we're looking at 72, 48, and 36 hours. 36 hours before landfall, we're shutting computer systems down. We're switching over to our hot site. We're moving computers away from Windows. We might be covering some things up that we're nervous about, or that might be susceptible to any kind of weather event that might happen. So that's what you do in a hurricane. This has happened to us, not recently, but I guess it was 3 years ago. There was an incident at our office complex, and the police had the place wrapped in tape, and we couldn't actually get in our building. So we all showed up to work at 10 till 8, and nobody could get in the building. So we're standing in the parking lot, and we were like, okay, here's our we don't have access to the building plan. Forward the phone calls, everybody go back home. If any of you had a planned visit to a customer site, go ahead and go now. Because we can just stand here in the parking lot and look at each other, or we can go do something to get something done and still service our clients. So you guys can do the same thing. What happens if you don't have access to the building? You may not have any control over that. If you're leasing space or working with somebody else where you don't necessarily control your access to the building, this kind of stuff can happen where the building can be shut down. We had some clients during the COVID months where for one reason or another, the building had to be closed and cleaned for a day or two. And you have no control over that. If the property management locks the door, you can't get in and you have to have a plan. So those are some other ways that your disaster and preparedness can affect even non-hurricane type of events. Step 4, records and data. So this is something that we keep track of for a lot of you because we know where your data is. But this is an important exercise for you to go through to think about where things are being stored and how they're being stored and how they're being backed up and what do you do and how do you access them in a disaster. So we like to look at this as sort of line of business by line of business, or maybe even department by department is another way to look at it. So you can say, where does sales store all of their information? Okay, some of sales's information is in this piece of software. Some of it is in Excel spreadsheets that are saved in this location. Okay, great. HR, where does HR keep these records and how do we know where they are? And this is all to drive you to the idea of like, how do we get to this information in the event of a disaster? And do we know where it is and where it's being stored? Something that we run into a lot, and it's just the nature of IT stuff, but a lot of times your end users, your staff, your people, they don't always know where the data is. They just know, well, I go here to get to it. But digging in a little deeper and making sure that we all understand where we go to get that information is important too. Because we want to help you get that information, but you kind of have to know where it is also. Like we have to work together to find what you might need during a storm or disaster. So kind of item by item, what happens to this tool in a disaster? These are things we can help you guys build out for your business. But these are the kinds of things that we want to be prepared for when it comes to a storm. Your medical records software, your quoting software, your account website portal, that kind of thing. How do we get to these things? So in step 4, when you think about where the data is, you want to think about how it's protected and how it's backed up. In the world of technology backups, there's 2 sort of acronyms that we use. One's called recovery point objective, and one's called the recovery time objective. And to simplify both of those, it's basically how much data can you afford to lose and how much time can you afford to be down. And a lot of people, the gut reaction is, I can't afford to lose anything and I can't afford to be down at all. Okay, well, the reality is that none of us work at the New York Stock Exchange where things happen by the millisecond. Most of us work in a different kind of business, and we can actually work through what's most important and what's least important and how we're able to back it up and make that successful. Because if you want zero downtime and you want backups to the minute, those can be really expensive solutions for your business. But if you're okay with other backup strategies or other windows of time, those are more sort of economical for what your business might need. So when we look at these different systems that you have, we want to know that they're being backed up in the most appropriate way. Some of you guys already know this, but like our standard backup is 8 o'clock in the morning, noon, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and 8 o'clock at night. And we always feel like those windows of time give us a lot of flexibility where somebody can recreate work in the event that something happens to that data. It doesn't even have to be a storm. It can just be an accidental deletion of data. It could be somebody loses something, but we want to know, hey, I can take you back to the last 3 or 4 hours, depending on when you did the work. And that's usually a pretty good window. That window can be sufficient for lots of businesses, lots of data types. Granted, If you think that you have data that has to be a tighter window than that, we need to talk about that so that we can make an appropriate plan for, hey, I can't afford to lose an hour worth of data. An hour worth of data might be worth $100,000. Okay, well, if an hour worth of data is worth $100,000, then I can't let you lose 4 hours worth of data, as an example. So those are things we need to talk through and make sure that we're appropriately protecting the data and we know where it is. And if we're protecting it and we know where it is, then we know what to do in a disaster. It kind of builds on each other like that. Obviously, get the right insurance coverage, just like checking your smoke alarms. Again, this is a great time to look at any of your insurance coverages. Talk to your insurance carrier. I'm not an insurance person, but we have to buy insurance just like you do, and we have to protect the things that we have here. And I'm always amazed every year at what changed. We bought this much more equipment, or we have this many more staff people, or we have this much, we changed our servers and they're here, or we got rid of some servers and they're somewhere else. These different things that change about your environment and what that means to how you cover it via your insurance. Because if you ever ended up in a situation where your business was at a total loss and we had to replace and restore everything, we know your inventory. Like, we know how many switches you have and how many servers you have and how many workstations you have. We can go print that up real quick and tell you what we're missing. But I don't know how many desks and chairs and, all those other things that are inside your business that you need to keep track of also, so that you could get back up and going well in the event of disaster. So take this as an opportunity to reach out to your insurance folks and talk about it. I do know that there are some rules and concerns about changing insurance. When there's a storm in the Gulf, you're locked in. So if you have any concerns about this, do it before there's a storm in the Gulf. There's some things that can't change once there's already a storm, in the Gulf. So keep that in mind. Take this as another good opportunity or reminder to go deal with some of those things. We'll send out these links also as part of the presentation, but these are some really great resources that we have at our disposal. That first one is a checklist for you to use at your family in your home. If some of you are like me, in the event of a disaster, I have to take care of the company and I have to take care of my home. And I have both of those things, and hopefully they're not competing with each other in my time. So I like to have a plan for both places. So the Red Cross puts out a home or family planning kind of document to get ready for a disaster and be prepared in your home as well. It's a great thing to share with your folks. And then obviously that last link on there is the outage map for AEP. So also a great thing to go get familiar with now and know what's going to look like, what things might look like in the event of a disaster. Are there any questions in the chat? We're going to check the chat. Any questions from those of y'all that are here in person? No? Okay. Well, great. Well, thanks for joining us, everybody. I appreciate it. We'll go ahead and shut the Zoom call down. And thanks. I appreciate y'all's time. Bye.